Good morning. I'm Julien Venne. I'm head of Department of Social and Health Innovation at the Prasanna School of Public Health in MAHE. I'm as well affiliated to the United Nations University. And I'm very pleased to participate to this workshop, even if I don't have the possibility to attend in person because I'm traveling at the moment in Europe. But I'm very pleased to participate to this workshop. And thank you very much to the MCHP and the Department of Health Information Management and Dr. Reshmi for their invitation. And I will try to share with you a few insights around the trustworthiness concept and the governance concept around data and AI during this presentation. So I will share my screen and I will start straight toward the explanation of this topic, important topic in digital health, because of course digital health is mainly based on data, and we will see it now. So a few years ago, The Economist was titling one of its edition in May 2017, and basically designating data as the new oil. Here we can see on the picture that the different companies managing massive data and big data in the world were represented as companies extracting oil from the ground and using this data, this new oil, for their activities and their business models. So the question is it accurate, this comparison between data and oil? Well, in one sense, we can say yes, because of course, like in oil market, the data market is governed and dominated by a few companies. The one we know very well, like the MAMA, so is the new name for GAFA, the Microsoft, Apple, Alphabet, Meta, and Amazon companies, but as well the Chinese companies like Tencent, for instance, and as well some intermediaries on data brokers or data platforms providing data across the world, so like Oracle or Actium, for instance. So in a sense, it's like on the oil market, we have large companies dominating these markets. Another comparison around data is coming to the definition, the proper definition of data. What is data? So basically, data only point of collection around the individual, and this data could be transformed with the context of use, a use case, into information. This information, thanks to scientific work or professional expertise, can be transformed into knowledge. This knowledge is related, each piece of knowledge is related to each other and gives some insight on a specific situation. And from the insight, we can extract a kind of wisdom and even potentially conspiracy theory. But it was more for the joke. To say that if we are not relying all the data, the information, the knowledge correctly together, of course, we cannot obtain a real wisdom or real insight around the situation we are looking at. So in this sense, it's comparable to oil, because raw oil under the rock is not very useful, but refining this oil and transforming this oil into other components and other products make the value of it. And it's basically what is happening as well with data. So it could be considered as accurate comparison, but another important aspect is that oil is limited on Earth. So it's not the case, it's a big difference, it's not the case of data. As you can see on this diagram, the production of data and the volume of data produced in the world, all sector mixed, is rising and rising since 2010, well, actually since more than that, until now. And every year we have a big growth of the volume of data. So you can see that in 2021, date of this study from Statista, we were around 79 zettabytes. Zettabytes is 10 with 21 zero behind. a big number. So 79 zettabytes data produced in a year. And we expect for 2025 to reach the number of 181 zettabytes, which is huge. So we see this exponential curve, and the production of data, the availability of data, and the increasing amount of data make it different from oil, of course, because it's a very, very different kind of product. The other important aspect around data which differentiates from oil is that it's reusable. It doesn't mean that because I share my data with you that I won't be able to exploit my data. So what I mean is that when you take 1 liter of oil and you use it, you cannot reuse it after that. When you take 1 zettabyte of data, you can reuse this zettabyte of data in different contexts for different use and by different people without decreasing the value of the data. And it's even more because if you combine this data with other data, then you obtain some emergence, new insights, new information, new knowledge, and you will be able to create innovation and to create new ideas and new strategies from the combination of different data. So that's why I wrote here 1 + 1 = 3 in the data world and not like oil. What is interesting with digital and data-driven approach is that we can have a high level of personalization. This is the first superpower of digital. The fact that with this data, we are able to target very specifically each individual and to have a very individual personalized approach. And we can tailor the services we are providing to this individual. It's the case in healthcare, but it's the case, of course, in other sectors. Like, I don't know, e-commerce, for instance, Amazon is tailoring its interface to you, to your previous purchase, to your interest and your preferences. So the personalization could be a great aspect of digital, which is pretty useful to healthcare when we try to personalize a treatment or personalize a follow-up of a patient. And as well, at the same time, we are very specific around an individual. It's really easy to scale up the systems, the digital systems, because digital has a very low marginal cost, and it's very easy to deploy digital systems across a large population, like in India, 1.4 billion people. So digital is an interesting resource. At the same time, we can be very specific, very personalized, and at the same time, we can reach out to a large group of individuals in the large population. So what is in it for healthcare? Well, healthcare, of course, has developed since many years what I call here the P medicine. The P stands for several kind of words, and actually we were used for the 4P medicine or the 5P medicine, but now I've seen publication around the 15P medicine. Well, the idea is not to decline all the P's we can find around medicine, but basically we are able to make it more precise or personalized. We are able to prevent more thanks to the digital approach. We are able to predict what will happen in the future, and so on and so on. We can have different attributes actually around the medicine or health to make it better thanks to data-driven systems. Another important aspect to take in account on the use of digital into healthcare is the fact that we are facing different challenges in terms of healthcare than a few years ago. When I say a few years ago, it's a few centuries ago. Nowadays, the total disease burden in the world is related mainly to non-communicable disease, NCDs. And we can see here that there is a growth every year of this NCDs part in the burden, all cause in the world. Of course, the communicable and other disease take a part above the 60% of NCDs to the 90% more or less. So about around 25 to 30% of communicable disease and other disease. And injuries or basically the remaining 10%. And so the fact that NCDs are taking so large place in the healthcare activities as a consequence in terms of kind of care we are providing and the quality of this care we are providing, because our systems, our healthcare systems, were designed more for acute events rather than chronic disease. And so digital can help to face these challenges of NCDs thanks to digital. Another way to look at it is the leading cause of death globally or in low and middle income countries. We see that in this list, top 10 of causes of death, chronic disease are taking a large part of them. And preventable disease actually is an important term here, because chronic disease, of course, are related to factors, risk factors, which could be prevented or could be tackled via good follow-up. So actually what is determining today the healthcare of the population is not necessarily the access to care, which is standing for more or less 10%, not the genetics only, because it's accounting for 20% of our health, but it's something which is nowadays in the ethical framework we have across the world, not something we can modify into humans, at least. But of course, the health will be based essentially 70% essentially on other aspects, which are the lifestyle and the behaviors and the living environment. These two aspects are the main driver of interventions, especially when we talk about non-communicable disease, which again represent the larger volume of patients. Other determinants of health, we are more and more talking about well-being, and well-being is a more holistic vision of healthcare and of health in general, and integrating other aspects of our life, which are contributing to our good health and good well-being and wellness. But we have as well to take in account other determinants which are intrinsic or external to us, like the social determinant of health. You have here on the right side of the slide a description of some of these determinants of health: education, or quality of healthcare, or the neighborhood and the built environment where we live in, the social and the community context, the economic stability as well are a huge determinant, as you may know, of the health of the people. Some social, political, commercial, or corporate determinants of health are entering into place. And if we want to have a personalized approach in terms of treatment, in terms of follow-up, in terms of advice we are giving to the patient, of course, we have to rely on a large number of data. A large number of data means certainly as well a large number of stakeholders. Healthcare is nowadays not the work of one single doctor or health professional somewhere, but certainly the cooperation of different stakeholders. And actually we are in a multi-stakeholder ecosystem where health and social care providers and professionals will work with companies, startups, and large corporates, will work under the guidance and the regulation and laws of policymakers. We work with academics. We work under funding of financing schemes, so it will constrain as well their action, and certainly as well some third sector players like patient associations, for instance, who are contributing to the healthcare. So it means that we have to be able to collect information from all these stakeholders and to coordinate all these stakeholders around the patient, around the citizens, in order to provide the better care. Another aspect to take in account is that because we have in the world, I would say, you have on the left side a graphic representing the different world zone. We have a huge penetration of smartphones and other type of device collecting data. So we see that in India, for instance, last year, Deloitte count around 800 million smartphones in India. It's expecting to grow in 2026 to 1 billion or more than 1 billion smartphones in India. So of course, smartphones become a hub for both data collection and provision of care that we have to take in account in health care. Additionally to the smartphone, other types of devices are developing very hard at the moment and since many years. And we see that the imagination of startups and large companies, or medtech companies, or tech companies in general, have enabled the creation of multiple wearables, multiple devices that can track many types of data on the human body. And we have now a complete coverage of the human body in order to track any data we would like to track. So it creates kind of data ecosystem around each individual, each patient, with data coming from different sources, whether there are classic sources like at the left from the hospital, from the labs, from the biobanks, from the electronic medical record or electronic health record, but as well from new vector, new media like the wearables, like the smartphone, like social media as well. Social media are an interesting source of information when we want to work on population health. And I put a picture as well of a smart city. The cities are tracking a number of information, traffic, air pollution, consumption of energy, movement of the citizens. Well, the cities nowadays are tracking a lot of data, and this data could be useful for healthcare as well. And actually, if we collect all these data around the individual, we will obtain what we call a digital twin, the capacity to twin somebody with a digital version of us, taking different parameters. Of course, it won't be a perfect representation of the individual, only via the data sources we are able to collect. But it will create a virtual image of ourselves, which is pretty interesting to work with when we are healthcare professional, because we have a near real-time idea of what is the situation of this individual, both in terms of medical parameters, clinical parameters, but as well in lifestyle parameter or living environmental parameter. The concept of digital twin is not new. It was applied before previously, more in the industry sector, more in order to duplicate or create a digital twin of a machine or of a specific object for maintenance reasons. For instance, in aeronautics, where I was working previously, we use digital twins every day to plan some maintenance or to predict some issues that we could have with the machine. Well, here is the same. In healthcare, digital twins are rising, and more researchers and physicians are working on this concept of digital twin. So now coming to the question of governance, and especially data governance, I wanted to highlight my version of what should be the main components of data governance. I say my version because you will find in the literature or in the internet several approach of data governance, and depending on who is writing this framework, you will have more or less technical aspects, more or less policies aspect, organizational aspect. So for the purpose of this presentation, I would simplify with these 7 components around data governance. So to govern properly data or data sets, it's important first to establish policies and the framework in terms of laws and regulation that you have to comply with, depending on where you are, in which context you are using the data. The law around personal health data will change in India compared to Europe, compared to US or Australia. So every government will define a different regulatory framework, and you have to take that in account and develop as well in your healthcare setting or in your digital health platform. You need to define as well your own policies regarding these data. The second point is around the organization and the decision-making process around this data. It's very important, and we'll talk more about that afterwards, around the challenges around data, because of course, personal data in general are sensitive objects that we have to manipulate carefully, and the decision upon the use and exploitation of the data should be very precisely defined. But we are talking about personal health data in our case, and of course it's even more sensitive and could have big consequences if a data leak or data breach is happening. And so that's why the organization and decision-making process is very important. The data ecosystem, where you are taking your data, which are your sources, how you interoperate with other IT systems. The question of interoperability is in digital health since its beginning. It's actually one of the first issue and challenge that digital health experts are meeting when they develop solutions, how to make compatible some data coming from another system to our system. Compatible, interoperable means in a technical term for the standards of storage of data, but as well in semantic terms, how we call a disease, how we call some procedures differ from one system to another, even from one hospital to the other. So it's important to work on this question of interoperability, to make it trustable and to make it understandable by anyone on the care chain around the patient. Then we have data catalogs. The question of the way we are organizing the data in our databases or data lakes is very important. The metadata that we are creating around the individual data, some creating of some indexes in order to organize these data together. Very important point 5, around the privacy and the cybersecurity. I will come back to the question of privacy later. But in terms of cybersecurity, we know that hospitals and healthcare facilities in general are the main target of hackers, of cyber attacks, because, of course, the value of this data is very high on the black market of data. Of course, we observed some ransomware or some data breach in different hospitals. It happened recently in India, but it happens every day in the world in different hospitals. So it's really important to develop a very strong cybersecurity system and cybersecurity policy as well. Number 6 is around the data quality. Of course, if we want to trust the data, we need to be confident on the quality of this data. And for this data quality, we have different attributes to check when we are building some data sets. I will come back to this question as well in an upcoming slide. But the data quality is a very important point. And last point, point 7, which is encapsulating a lot of aspects, but the data management and the data processing at large is very important. The way you are storing the data, the way you are moving the data from one place to another, the way you are collecting them, the way you are organizing them. This data management aspect is very crucial. And will lead to good or bad results on your digital health system or digital health platform if you develop them. So these are the main components, because the list is not exhaustive and we could detail a bit more each category, but it gives you a rough idea of what we talk about when we talk about data governance. So first point, you remember in the previous graph, first point was about policies, laws, and regulation. I wanted to highlight here the recently published Personal Data Protection Bill, so published last November, if I remember well, in India or for India, in order to protect the personal data. We are not specifically talking about healthcare here. It's a more generic bill. But it's covering as well healthcare. And we see that in this new proposition of law, which has not been, well, at least in my information, is not been validated and endorsed by the parliament yet, but it's planned this year. And actually, this new law is involving three type of player and stakeholder. One is what they call in the law the data principle. The data principle is you and me, the citizen, the patient, the subject of the data. Another one is the data fiduciary. The fiduciary is the one collecting and holding the data and storing the data. And the third player is the data processor, so the one processing the data, making some analytics on the data, which could be the same as the data fiduciary, but could be as well a third party. So that's why we have three main characters in this story, in this new law. So what are the main components of this data protection bill, which is, by the way, pretty close from other kind of regulation that we can observe in the world? It's a case of GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe. GDPR is based on similar principles. It has been adopted in 2018. So, well, it entered in force in 2018 in Europe, as you may be aware. And the Indian version of data protection law is based on the same principles. But we can have as well some examples on the state of California in the US has a specific bill comparable with similar principles as this one, and other countries in the world have adopted recently as well comparable legislation. So what are these components of this bill? The first main component is the question of notice. It's important that each data fiduciary, so it means the person, in our case, for instance, an hospital asking for data to a patient, or primary care center asking for data to a patient, should notice in a clear and plain language the description of which personal data we will collect and why we are collecting them. So the purpose of the processing we will do on this data in itemized notice. So it means in a very easy to read and quick to read and understand notice. And it's an obligation of the data fiduciary to communicate that to the data principal, so to the patient or the citizen. The second important component is the component of consent. So each data principal, each citizen or patient should give freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous indication of the data principal to accept the collection of this data. It should be an affirmative action, so it means it's an opt-in approach, not an opt-out. So it means that we cannot consider that the consent is there unless the person is ticking a box. It's the opposite. So the person should do affirmative action and positive action to express our consent on our agreement on the processing of our personal data. And this is again comparable to what we have in GDPR in Europe, for instance, on this. I will come back to this question of consent, which is not only the most developed solution found around data protection, but it's certainly not the optimal one, in my point of view. Then we have another series of obligations for the data fiduciary. It should ensure the accuracy and the completeness of the collected data. It should ensure the privacy and the cybersecurity. It should ensure the notification in case of breach, notification of the person, but as well notification of the authorities. And should proceed with some data audits time to time in order to ensure the quality, certainly, of the data sets he's holding. And some rights for the data principal, so for the citizen, access to the personal data. So if an hospital is collecting data for me with medical device, for instance, in the hospital, I should be able to access this personal data. I should have access as well to the list of data fiduciaries with who this data has been shared and who has access to these data sets. I have the right as well to correct or to suppress, delete my personal data from the data fiduciary database. I should be able as well I have a right of grievance redressal and should be able to launch some queries and some grievance toward the data fiduciary. And in case of death or incapacity, each of us could nominate a data custodian or somebody that will act in place of the data principal if this data principal is not capable to take the decisions. There are some other articles in this Personal Data Protection Bill of India. The fact that the transfer of personal data abroad in external countries could be limited by the government. So the government can decide if some countries are not authorized to receive personal data coming from India. This is we don't have a list yet, but this is a possibility that the government is keeping in this law. There is the setup and the creation actually of a national data protection board for the country, for India, with a new institution in charge of dealing with the different grievances and queries of citizens and data principal, between data principal and data fiduciaries, of course. And there is a penalty system. So, for instance, a data breach could cost a fine of up to 250 crores rupees. So it's a fairly large amount of money. But of course, the idea, and it's the same in GDPR in Europe, the idea is to dissuade anyone to take it lightly, and to don't apply the disposition and the requirements of the law. And of course, the idea is to incentivize all the players to comply with this new regulation. So this is the law in India. Well, this is the law. This will be the law in India if no large modification is done before the vote at the parliament. But it's basically comparable to other frameworks we have in other countries. I said that the consent was certainly the most developed tool for controlling the privacy and protecting the personal data, but it's certainly not the best tool. We've seen that already in Europe since the adoption of GDPR, the data protection regulation. Because you will all have seen these pop-up messages when you open a web page called a cookie. It's called a cookie, asking you if you accept yes or no to be tracked, and that we collect some data around the use of this specific web page. These cookies are a form of consent, and actually, when we have to collect your data, most of the time it's a long document, very long document, very complex to read for a non-initiated person, and actually because of the time it requires and because the complexity of this document, most of the time people are not reading. And so it means, you remember in the law we are talking about an informed consent. It means that we have been informed. In this case, because of the nature of the document, we are not really informed. And actually, we are in a situation of power imbalance. When I want to access a website or web page or a service, I need to accept this condition before accessing. And it's a bit a take it or leave it approach. And most of the time we are clicking yes or okay without thinking, without reading the document, because we really want or really need to use the service or the web page. And so clicking the decline or the no button is almost impossible because of this power imbalance. Another issue with personal consent or individual consent is related to the question of ownership of data. Very complex in terms of law to define the ownership of something like a data. There is a huge debate in the academic field, law academic field, on this question of ownership. But my position personally is to find pretty difficult to attach the ownership of specific data to one single person. Because why? Because I give you two examples. My birth date is as well, so it's mine, it's my birth date, but it's as well the date of delivery of my mother. So the same data, the date of my birth, is co-owned, if you want, between me, my birth date, and my mother or my father, because it's the date of delivery. and the date they had their first child. So it's very difficult to clearly define a property or an ownership of the data between these two different people. Another example is we have a group, like on this picture, of people interacting with Facebook, let's say. Some of them are deciding to don't accept to share some of their personal data, but one of them is accepting and taking this individual consent and clicking yes. And actually, the data collected from one individual, let's say 30 years old, a young guy living in Karnataka and being a student at the University of MAHE, this young guy will share his own data, so it's his right to accept to share his own data, but actually the system behind Facebook, the system behind this kind of platform, is to develop some trends and some logic and some predictive models on the behavior of this person or group of person that will have the same characteristic, and then to impact the service they are providing to similar people in their customer basis, thanks to the predictive model they have done on this first user. So what I mean is that when I decide to share my data for the personalization of one specific service on a platform, this platform will use my data to influence the service she's providing to other users. So in this sense, it's very difficult to consider the content as individual, because if I share my data, I have an impact as well on other people. And that's why the question of ownership and the question of consent could be seen as well at the collective level, at the community level. And all the question will be which level of community or which level of collective we would like to organize this governance. Another important aspect of the data governance is, I said it earlier, it's the data quality. Of course, you cannot trust the data you have in front of your eyes if you are not sure of the quality of the data. So we have as well different dimensions around the quality, and data platform or digital health platform are usually developing some processes and techniques to check each of these dimensions. So I quickly list this dimension, the dimension of consistency, to observe and to check if there are no contradictions within the data and the data sets we have collected. The accuracy, the fact to check that the data we have in the database are matching with the reality. The completeness, the fact that we don't have missing data in the database or a limited number, because of course it could influence the processing we will do with this data afterwards. If we have a series of data missing in a database, then it can influence the results of the calculation. Auditability, the fact that we can access to the data and track the modifications which have been made on the data set. The orderliness, the fact that the data have the correct format and structure in order to be processed and in order to be used and utilized. The uniqueness, the fact that we don't have duplicates in the database and the data records appear only once. And the timeliness, the fact that the data reflect the reality within a reasonable period of time. This reasonable period of time has to be defined depending on the use case. In healthcare, it depends basically the type of case we will try to treat. If we are on chronic disease with evolutions being certainly a bit longer in terms of duration, then we can accept a longer period of time between the data collection and the data storage and display. If we are talking about emergency, of course, the period of time will be shorter. So it depends a lot on the structure. So all these 7 attributes are important to check when we are manipulating data and large volume of data. Another aspect around privacy, so we've seen the data protection, the consent in this data protection regulation, but we've seen as well the limit of the consent aspect, because we are not fully informed about what is happening. Another approach, very much evolving and innovating at the moment, is the domain of the privacy enhancing technologies. So these are specific technologies that will enable the processing of data, but without accessing directly to the original data. So just to explain, if I take, for instance, the first bullet point I put on this slide, the differential privacy, the idea is to take a data set. So let's say we take the medical record of all the cardiology department of Kasturba Hospital. We have the name of the patient, the age, the address, the type of disease, the type of procedure, the type of labs results, etc. We have a huge database of information about each patient, and each line is one patient, and we have, let's say, 20,000 patients. So the idea of differential privacy is to be able to create a copy of this data set, but to introduce some noise or mathematical noise. The idea is to copy the data set without copying each data point by point in the same values that they have in the original data set, but to keep a general mathematical and statistical property into the global data set, which will enable some processing, some calculation, some machine learning as well. I will come to AI and machine learning later. But in the similar way that we would do on the original data set, but it's done on an image which is noisy, which is not exactly the same. And so it's mathematically impossible to re-identify each individual. So the idea of differential privacy, for instance, to take this one, is to enable professionals or data scientists to work on data sets which are reflecting the reality in terms of mathematics and statistics very, very carefully, but without having access directly to the whole data. So there are plenty of techniques which are developing at the moment. It's pretty advanced research and new research which is developed on these questions. It's still not completely mature, but it's something that we start to implement. Differential privacy, for instance, I've implemented in several projects already, and it's working pretty well to be able to play with the data, to work on them, but without accessing to the direct original data, which of course it's important when we are talking to people about the trust they will put on the system. If they know that nobody will have access to their original data, but only on copies which are introduce some noise, then they will feel more confident to share their personal data. So for all these reasons, the question of consent, which is a bit biased, the question of the quality, the question of the policies, and the question of the collective approach of the decision around data. One of the research we are developing at Prasanna School of Public Health is around the data concept of data cooperative as a model of governance for data, because we believe that the cooperative is the right legal entity and legal framework to be able to cope with these different challenges, individual versus collective, privacy, preserving approach, and to be sure that we are in an ethical framework all along the process, from data collection to the results and the utilization of the data. So the cooperative is an object, a legal object, which is included in almost all the countries in the world. It's the case in India, of course. India has a long tradition of cooperative in different sectors, not in data yet, but in different sectors. So a cooperative is an autonomous association of persons united voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. So it's an enterprise which belongs to everybody at the same time, and in which the decision-making is completely democratic. So you have a series of values and principles associated with cooperatives. And if you respect these values, you answer a lot of questions in terms of trustworthiness of data and data governance, and the challenges I was mentioning earlier around the movement between the individual level and the community or collective level. The cooperative is a good instrument for that. So we have designed, I won't enter in the detail because it would be long, but we have designed since a few years a model for data cooperative, and especially health data cooperative, with non-profit entities, gathering a multi-stakeholder ecosystem. As I said, it's major importance in the healthcare, modern healthcare, in a data-driven mode, to engage the citizen, to enable the trust, thanks to different privacy-preserving technology, consent done in the best way, both at individual and collective level, to develop directly data-driven interventions from the cooperative, and to make it sustainable, actually, thanks to the data economy, because when we are in this situation with a cooperative, we are able to monetize or exploit data sets, because we are creating images with the privacy enhancing technologies, images of the data set. So no data breach can happen, no re-identification can happen. So privacy is 100% preserved. And so we can put that on the data economy market, which is a huge market in the world, and create some new revenues for the healthcare systems beyond the classic revenues from insurances or national governmental schemes. So this is a concept we have developed. I would be happy to connect with you if you're interested to know more on this concept. To finish the presentation, sorry, I'm a bit long, around AI. The question of AI trustworthiness. I took the European example to just give an insight on that, and I know that you have other presentation around artificial intelligence. But basically, Europe took an approach to regulate AI based on the concept of risk. So the first important thing in this European regulation, and actually the AI Act in Europe is still in discussion at the European Parliament, so it's not voted. It's planned later this year or next year, I believe, but still in discussion. But one basic principle, fundamental principle, is the fact that we will classify the different AI solution into different level of risk. Of course, AI applied to health is matching with a high risk aspect because it's health, it's sensitive. We are talking about personal health data. So the high risk category match with healthcare, but other type of AI could be developed around minimal risk and limited risk, and the process for their market access is lighter. We have defined as well in Europe some principles for ethics and some requirements toward the AI solution to make them trustworthy. So the 4 principles for ethics are the respect of human autonomy, the prevention of harm, the fairness, and the explicability or explainability. I will come back to this ethical principle and how we do that. And we have 7 key requirements around AI solutions. The fact that it respects the human agency and oversight, it's technically robust, and it preserves the safety of the users, preserves as well the privacy, and have a good data governance practices. It's transparent, it reflects the diversity, it doesn't discriminate, and it's fair. It supports the societal and environmental well-being, and it's accountable. So it means that the AI editors should be accountable for the consequences of the use of their tool. So these are the main principles, which are basically the framework behind which the AI Act in Europe has been written. Just a last point on the explicability or explainability of the AI. So what we mean by explainable AI, I found this graphic pretty easy to understand. So today we have a training data set for artificial intelligence. We have some processes of machine learning. We have a function, so a model, AI model, a machine learning model, which is done. And then we propose that to the user, and the user have a result. So let's take, for instance, a radiologist. There will be a AI looking at the scanner, for instance, of his patients, and the radiologist will receive only if it's positive or negative, or there is a bone fracture or not, or the diagnostic that the AI is advising him. In the world of explainable AI, in this case, the machine will achieve a diagnostic, but will explain the diagnostic to the user, in this case, the radiologist, and will tell him how the model has taken the decision. So the user is able to understand why or why not, is able to assess if, in his opinion, the model made a mistake or not, and so decide if he trusts the AI or not, and if he confirms the diagnostic or not. So most of the system nowadays, or the new systems, are based on explainable AI. So we try, especially in medicine, to provide some indication to the physicians about how the model has taken its decision, which factor, which parameter have influenced the decision. And then the health professional can make his or her decision, knowing a bit how the machine has worked and reflect. So that's what my last point. I was a bit quick on some aspects. Certainly, it would require some discussion, but I won't be able to answer your question now. But I would be pleased to take them after the workshop and to enter in contact with you. So feel free to contact me. You have my email address here, or to ask to the Department of Health Information Management to transfer this question. I would be pleased to answer them next week. Thank you very much, and have a nice day and nice workshop today. Bye-bye.